There's a moment in dating that confuses almost everyone. It's when someone pulls back, acts distant, or says something that feels like rejection, but something about it doesn't quite add up. Because deep down you feel it. The connection is there. The chemistry is real. And yet, their words don't match their energy. What if I told you that sometimes the very things that sound like disinterest are actually signs of something much deeper? You see, avoidant people don't fall in love the way most people do. They don't run toward connection. They resist it. They question it. They try to control it. And that means when they say certain phrases, they're not pushing you away because they feel nothing. They're pulling back because they feel too much. When someone says, "I'm not ready for something serious right now," it can feel like the door is closing right in front of you. It sounds definitive, almost like a polite way of saying, "This isn't going anywhere." And for many people, that's exactly how it lands: rejection, disappointment, confusion. But when you're dealing with someone who has avoidant tendencies, this phrase often carries a very different meaning beneath the surface. Because here's the truth: people who genuinely feel nothing don't usually need to explain themselves in this way. They don't sit you down and carefully create distance with words that sound thoughtful. They simply drift away, they disengage, they disappear. But when someone takes the time to tell you they're not ready, what they're often revealing without realizing it is that something about this connection has reached a level of emotional intensity they didn't expect. For an avoidant person, serious doesn't just mean commitment. It means vulnerability. It means being seen. It means stepping into a space where they can no longer fully control how much they feel or how much they might get hurt. And that loss of control is deeply uncomfortable for them. So instead of leaning into the connection, they instinctively try to slow it down or create distance. What's fascinating is that this reaction isn't triggered by a lack of chemistry. It's triggered by too much of it. Something about you has made them feel more than they're used to feeling, more than they know how to manage. And instead of saying, "I'm overwhelmed," or "this scares me," they translate that internal chaos into something that sounds more rational, more socially acceptable. "I'm not ready." It's a protective mechanism, a way of keeping one foot out the door so they don't feel trapped. Because in their mind, seriousness equals expectations, and expectations equal pressure. And pressure feels like a threat to their independence, their identity, their emotional safety. But here's where you have to be very careful. Just because this statement can signal deeper feelings doesn't mean you should ignore it or try to convince them otherwise. In fact, the biggest mistake people make in this situation is hearing this and thinking, "I just need to prove to them that I'm worth it," or "if I'm patient enough, they'll come around." That mindset often leads you to overinvest, to overgive, to shrink your own needs in the hope that they'll eventually choose you fully. The reality is, this statement is both a glimpse into their feelings and a boundary they are setting. They may feel something real, something powerful, but they are also telling you they are not currently equipped to handle it in the way you might want or deserve. So instead of focusing on what they might feel deep down, the more important question becomes, what are they actually able to give you right now? Because attraction without action creates confusion. And confusion is often where people lose themselves trying to decode someone else. Understanding this dynamic gives you clarity, not false hope. It allows you to see that their hesitation isn't necessarily about your value, it's about their capacity. And once you see that clearly, you can stop chasing potential and start choosing what truly aligns with your standards, your emotional needs, and the kind of relationship you want to build. When someone says, "I don't want to hurt you," it can sound gentle, even caring on the surface. It feels like they're thinking about your feelings, like they're trying to protect you from something. But if you listen closely, there's a deeper layer to that statement, one that reveals far more about what's happening inside them than what's happening between you. Because think about it for a moment. People don't worry about hurting someone they feel nothing for. That level of concern doesn't come from indifference. It comes from awareness. Awareness that you matter. Awareness that your emotions are involved. And most importantly, awareness that what's building between you has the potential to become something significant. For someone with avoidant tendencies, this realization can feel overwhelming. It's not just about you getting hurt, it's about the entire emotional weight of the connection. When they start to sense that things are deepening, that expectations might grow, that feelings are becoming real, their instinct isn't to lean in. It's to step back before things get out of their control. So when they say, I don't want to hurt you, what they're often really saying is, I can feel this becoming something meaningful, and I'm not sure I can handle what comes with that. It's less of a warning about their intentions and more of a reflection of their fear. Fear of disappointing you, fear of failing in a relationship, fear of being responsible for someone else's emotional world. Avoidant individuals tend to anticipate problems before they even happen. They play out worst-case scenarios in their mind, imagining conflict, emotional demands, or situations where they might feel trapped or inadequate. And instead of facing those possibilities head-on, they try to escape them early by creating distance. But here's where it gets complicated. This statement can easily pull you into a position where you feel like you need to reassure them. You might feel tempted to say, you won't hurt me, or I'm not expecting anything, or let's just take it slow. And while those responses come from a genuine place, they can sometimes reinforce the dynamic where you're the one accommodating their fears while your own needs take a back seat. What's important to recognize is that this phrase is both revealing and limiting. It reveals that they see your value, that they recognize your emotional presence, that they understand this connection isn't casual. But it also limits what they're willing or able to give at this moment. And that's the part you can't ignore. Because someone can care about you and still not be ready to show up for you in a consistent, secure way. They can feel something real and still choose distance over closeness. So instead of focusing on the intention behind their words, focus on the reality of their actions. If someone is already preparing you for disappointment, it's not your job to convince them otherwise. It's your job to decide whether that's a dynamic you're willing to stay in. There's a difference between someone who fears hurting you but still steps up, communicates, and grows, and someone who uses that fear as a reason to hold back indefinitely. And recognizing that difference is what protects your emotional well-being. Because at the end of the day, love isn't just about who worries about hurting you. It's about who is willing to do the work to not hurt you and to stay present even when things become real. When someone says, I just need some space, it can feel like the connection is slipping through your fingers. It creates uncertainty, distance, and often a quiet panic that makes you wonder if you've done something wrong. But when you're dealing with someone who leans avoidant, this request for space isn't always about losing interest. It's often about managing emotions that have become too intense for them to comfortably process. Avoidant individuals have a very different relationship with closeness. While most people move toward connection when they feel something meaningful, avoidant people often do the opposite. The deeper the connection starts to feel, the stronger their instinct becomes to pull back. Not because the bond is weak, but because it's starting to affect them in a way that feels unfamiliar and, more importantly, uncontrollable. For them, emotional intensity can feel like pressure. It can feel like expectations are forming, like they're being pulled into something that might require more vulnerability than they're ready to give. And since they often value independence and self-protection above all else, their natural response is to create distance so they can regain a sense of control. So when they ask for space, what they're really doing is trying to regulate themselves. They're stepping away from the emotional heat of the connection so they can calm their internal world. It's not that they've stopped feeling, it's that they're feeling too much and don't know how to stay present in it without becoming overwhelmed. What makes this confusing is that their behavior can feel contradictory. One moment they're engaged, present, even affectionate, and the next they're distant and unavailable. That shift can make you question everything. But in many cases, that pullback happens precisely because the connection started to matter more than they expected. However, this is where you have to stay grounded in reality rather than getting lost in interpretation. Just because their need for space is driven by emotional overwhelm doesn't mean it automatically leads to something stable or secure. Space, if it becomes a pattern without clear communication or effort to reconnect, can slowly turn into emotional absence. It's also important to notice what happens after they take that space. Do they come back with clarity, with intention, with effort? Or do they return as if nothing happened, only to repeat the same cycle again? Because there's a big difference between someone who needs occasional space to process and someone who uses space as a posteriane escape from emotional responsibility. The temptation in this situation is to chase, to close the gap they've created, to reassure them, to try and pull them back in. But that often backfires. When someone asks for space, pursuing them too intensely can reinforce their need to withdraw even more. It confirms their fear that closeness equals pressure, Instead, the most powerful thing you can do is respect the space, but not at the cost of abandoning yourself. You allow them the distance they've asked for, while also paying attention to whether their behavior aligns with the kind of connection you truly want. Because while space can be a sign that something real is being felt, it's not a substitute for consistency, communication, and emotional availability. And at the end of the day, a healthy connection isn't just about how strongly someone feels, it's about how safely and steadily they can stay present with those feelings without constantly needing to run from them. When someone says, "I'm just really busy right now," it can sound completely reasonable. After all, life gets hectic. Work piles up, responsibilities take over, and sometimes people genuinely don't have the time or energy to invest in a relationship the way they'd like to. But when this phrase shows up repeatedly, especially right when things start to deepen, it often points to something more than just a full schedule. For someone with avoidant tendencies, busy can become a very convenient shield. It's a socially acceptable way to create distance without having to directly confront what they're feeling. Because saying, "I'm overwhelmed by how much I feel for you," or "this connection is starting to scare me," requires a level of emotional awareness and vulnerability they may not be comfortable with. So instead, they lean on something that feels safer, more neutral, something that doesn't expose what's really going on inside. What's important to understand is that avoidant individuals often use activity as a way to regulate their emotions. When feelings become intense, they don't sit with them. They distract themselves from them. Work, goals, routines, even social obligations can all become ways to stay mentally occupied so they don't have to face the emotional weight of a growing connection. And here's where it gets confusing for you. Because on one hand, they're busy, but on the other hand, they don't completely disappear. They still check in occasionally. They still respond, maybe inconsistently, maybe unpredictably, but just enough to keep the connection alive. That inconsistency creates a push-pull dynamic that can leave you overthinking everything. You might find yourself wondering, if they're so busy, why do they keep coming back? And the answer often lies in the fact that their feelings haven't gone away. They're just being managed from a distance. They're trying to keep one foot in the connection while keeping the other foot firmly planted in their comfort zone. But this is where clarity becomes essential. Because while their busyness may be rooted in emotional avoidance, it doesn't change the impact it has on you. Inconsistent communication, lack of presence, and unpredictability can slowly erode your sense of security in the connection. And no matter how valid their internal experience might be, it doesn't justify a dynamic that leaves you feeling uncertain or undervalued. It's also important to distinguish between someone who is temporarily busy and someone who uses busy as a long-term pattern. A person who genuinely values the connection will find ways to stay present, even in small ways. They'll communicate. They'll make time when it matters, and they'll show a level of intentionality that reflects how they feel. On the other hand, when busy becomes a recurring excuse without effort to create balance, it's often a sign that they're prioritizing emotional distance over emotional investment. And that's something you can't fix by being more patient, more understanding, or more accommodating. The key here is not to argue with their words, but to observe their actions. Because someone can say they're busy, but their behavior will always reveal where you truly stand in their life. And once you start paying attention to that, you move out of confusion and into clarity. Because at the end of the day, the right connection won't require you to constantly question whether someone has time for you. It will feel like a priority, not an afterthought, no matter how busy life gets. When someone says, "Let's just keep things casual," it can feel like a clear definition of where you stand, and not always in the way you want. It sounds like they're drawing a line, setting a boundary that limits how deep the connection can go. And for many people, that immediately translates to, "They're not serious about me." But when you're dealing with someone who leans avoidant, this phrase often holds a deeper contradiction. Because casual isn't always about a lack of interest. In many cases, it's about a desire to stay connected without stepping into the emotional intensity that comes with something more defined. It's their way of trying to control the pace and depth of the relationship so it doesn't overwhelm them. Avoidant individuals often struggle with labels and expectations. To them, words like relationship or commitment can feel heavy. They associate those labels with pressure, loss of independence, and emotional demands they're not sure they can meet. So instead of exploring what the connection could become, They try to contain it within something that feels safer, something undefined, flexible, and low pressure. But here's where it gets interesting. If someone truly wanted something casual in the purest sense, their behavior would reflect that. They would be inconsistent, detached, and minimally invested. There would be no real emotional presence, no effort to build something meaningful. It would feel light, surface level, and easy to walk away from. Yet with avoidant individuals, that's not always what happens. They may say they want casual, but then they show up in ways that don't quite match that label. They spend time with you, they open up in moments, they create memories, and they keep returning even when they've had opportunities to walk away. That's where the confusion begins, because their words are trying to minimize something their actions are quietly building. What they're really doing is trying to manage their own comfort zone. Casual becomes a psychological safety net. It gives them a sense of control, a way to tell themselves, this isn't too serious, I can handle this. It allows them to stay connected without fully confronting the depth of what they're feeling. But for you, this can create an emotional imbalance. Because while they're protecting themselves by keeping things undefined, you may find yourself becoming more invested, more emotionally involved, and more affected by the connection. And over time, that gap between what they say and what they do can become exhausting. The mistake many people make in this situation is accepting the casual label while hoping the reality will evolve into something more. They focus on the moments of closeness, the signs of deeper feeling, and they tell themselves, it's just a matter of time. But without clear intention and willingness from the other person, that shift often doesn't happen. It's important to recognize that someone can genuinely enjoy your presence, feel connected to you, and still choose to keep things casual because that's all they feel capable of handling. And that choice, regardless of the feelings behind it, defines the experience you're going to have with them. So instead of getting caught up in the contradiction, focus on alignment. Are their words and actions creating the kind of relationship you actually want? Or are you adjusting your expectations to fit what they're comfortable giving? Because a real connection isn't just about chemistry or moments of closeness, it's about mutual clarity, mutual effort, and a shared willingness to move forward. And if casual is where they insist on staying, then the question isn't whether they feel something, it's whether that something is enough for you. When someone says, you deserve someone better, it can feel like a quiet kind of heartbreak. It sounds like they're placing you on a pedestal while simultaneously stepping away from you. On the surface, it feels like rejection, but wrapped in something that almost sounds like admiration. And that contradiction is exactly what makes it so difficult to process. Because if they truly believed you deserve better, why are they the one deciding that for you? Why not let you choose? That's where the deeper meaning begins to reveal itself. For someone with avoidant tendencies, this statement is rarely about your worth. It's about their own internal doubts. It's about the gap they feel between who you are and who they believe they can be in a relationship. When they start to recognize your value, your consistency, your emotional presence, it doesn't always inspire them to rise to the occasion. Instead, it can trigger a fear that they won't be able to meet that standard. So rather than risk falling short, rather than risk being seen as inadequate, they create distance in a way that feels less exposing. Saying you deserve someone better allows them to exit without directly confronting their own insecurities. It shifts the focus onto your worth while quietly protecting their fear of not being enough. But there's also another layer to this. This phrase often shows up when the connection has reached a point where it requires more effort, more consistency, more emotional availability. And deep down, they sense that they're either unwilling or unable to give that. So instead of saying, I can't show up for you in the way you need, they reframe it into something that sounds more selfless. It's a way of softening the truth, a way of avoiding the discomfort of being honest about their limitations. And for you, this can create a powerful emotional pull. You might feel tempted to reassure them, to say, I don't need better, I choose you, or you are enough for me. You might want to close that gap they're describing to convince them that they're capable, that they're worthy, that they don't have to step away. But this is where you have to pause and really see what's happening. Because when someone tells you that you deserve better, they're not just expressing insecurity, they're also setting a limit on what they're willing to give. Whether it comes from fear, self-doubt, or emotional unavailability, the outcome is the same. They are stepping back instead of stepping up. And no matter how genuine their feelings might be, a connection can't thrive on potential alone. It requires action. It requires someone who is willing to meet you where you are, not someone who admires you from a distance while holding themselves back. There's also a subtle truth in their words that's easy to overlook. In a way, they're being honest, just not in the way it first appears. They may not believe they can give you the consistency, the security, or the emotional presence you truly deserve. And instead of waiting for that reality to unfold over time, they're expressing it upfront. The challenge is whether you choose to hear that truth or rewrite it into something more hopeful. Because at the end of the day, you don't need someone who thinks you deserve better. You need someone who chooses to be better for you. Someone who doesn't step back when things become real, but steps forward with intention, even when it's uncomfortable. And recognizing that difference is what keeps you from holding on to someone who sees your value but doesn't feel ready to match it.